Cool, shall we? It's a packed schedule today. Welcome to the second panel of the second day of Caption 2.0 in Coventry. This is a panel talking about small press publishing. I'm happy to have with me Ollie McNamee, who a lot of people possibly know as the bleeding cool Birmingham correspondent. Reese Finley, who is editor of the Indie Project.
Well, my main claim to fame is drawing room pictures on toilet walls, but I also do comics.
Right. And Jenny Scott, Caption Emeritus, I think we're going to go for. Contributor to various small press projects over the years. The three of you have all been involved in kind of comics publishing to a certain extent. You know, there are flyers for the Indie Project here, and also in terms of publicising comics as a medium. Where did that kind of interest and love come from?
You can start that one, Reece. You're the one with the comic.
Well, I was raised with comics. I think I got into them through the movies, which is probably a dirty way to get into them. But yeah, it's a Spider-Man movie that got me into them, and it was a constant love of comics through the years. And then, as I said, I'm running a podcast and stuff. I had a really nasty job for the last few years, and that ultimately led me to think, you know what, I'm going to stop working for the man and do my own thing, which is comics, which is what I wanted to do, and so kind of skyrocketed from there in the last 10 months.
Okay. And the Indie Project is published by Damn Dirty Comics.
Yeah.
So presumably there are other titles you do as well.
Yes, we've done a range of comics. My first one was like a semi-autobiographical horror, which was about my times in this not very nice job. I was working as a payday loan company.
Ooh.
Yeah. So I wasn't happy doing that. It's you're ruining people's lives for an extra £2 in your pay packet and stuff. It wasn't nice, and I did regret it. So it's about that and the impact it had on my mental health.
Oh my god.
And that was a lot more successful than I thought it'd be. I kind of did it as like a therapy, but I somehow stumbled into the comics industry, which is when it turned into Damn Dirty Comics, which was a comics label, and we've been putting out comics and recently the magazine.
Okay. And what did you do in terms of distribution for that first title? Were you actually physically taking it around to comic shops and say, would you stock my...
Yes, eventually. So we self-published it, as you do, and I did it at quite a big convention. I'm not going to name it, but it was a very unpleasant experience compared to conventions like this. We didn't do very well, but then after that we started driving up to other comic shops and selling it online and stuff, and that's when it really took off and it sold out within about a month, which is a success by my standards.
Yeah. Ollie, what's your secret origin?
Spinner racks. I'm of that generation that was able to get them from the spinner racks when they're about 15p a piece, and you could sometimes get about 3 or 4 months worth of one title all in the same day. Soon after that, a friend of mine in Chester started selling comics via his mate's record shop, Grey and Pink. He then ended up with his own comic shop and putting on his own comic conventions. But sort of take me back to where I am now, writing for Bleeding Cool. It's just really, I love comics, always have done, and with the sort of birth of the internet and the amount of trolling that goes on, the amount of misery that goes on, I have enough of that BS in my own life as a full-time teacher, with what the government's doing to teaching at a local and national level. So I wanted, I think, either, as an escape, and also, to shout about the industry that I love, whether it's the small press, the larger things, or even, places like Caption, anything I can do to support both the local and the national and the small press guys, the more the merrier, really. So, I suppose my philosophy is, be nice, and if you can't be nice, don't say anything.
Do you get any opportunities to use comics as a teacher?
Yeah, quite a lot. I use Watchmen with A-level media studies. A lot of them have seen the film, so they don't actually realise the comics. The other reason I use something like Watchmen is because it's very easy to read modern comics, and I think this is something that DC and Marvel are missing a trick on. It's very difficult, the page layout. I love the Electra comic stuff that I just saw you, because you're kind of guided around the page. You put a modern comic in front of many kids, it really is a problem. But as head of English, I've got quite a lot of say on the 3 reading weeks. So the next reading week we're doing in November is very much focused on comics. And we're very lucky in Birmingham to have people like Laura Howe, the Beano's first female artist, who does a lot of things for school,
Yeah.
Hunt Emerson as well. So I think by bringing comics into the classroom, particularly with the boys, I find that it covers a lot of things from literacy to storytelling to all sorts of different things. And you know, again, it's sharing my love and finding pupils who also have that love as well. I never read many books when I was growing up, and yet the irony is I'm head of English in a very successful English department, I'd like to say.
Yes, ironically, Laura being in Birmingham is a boon to you, but not so much to us, as she's actually trapped in Birmingham at the moment because there aren't any trains running.
Oh, dear. Oh, really?
Unfortunately, but such is a Caption experience. Jenny, like I said, you're a Caption emeritus, so you've been involved in Caption over the years. Did that always go hand in hand with you also making comics, or did one come before the other?
No, I don't really make comics very much. We have kind of, outside of the mainstream of kind of publishing things, we've been involved with various kind of much smaller affairs like midwinter comics retreats that we've been doing kind of off and on, where, you know, just a bunch of pals hire a place for like a long weekend and jam a comic together. And in fact, these guys here have actually been involved and published them subsequently as well. So that's kind of the main extent of any writing or drawing comics that I've been involved in more recently. Really, my focus is more on the kind of the small press side, the fan side of it as well. In terms of kind of my background in comics, you know, when I was a kid, you had the weekly comic that you got at the newsagents. They save it for you, or it was delivered through your door. And there was a lot of comics published at that time, obviously. Now you've got, you know, your 2000 AD, but which is from that time. But at that point, you had umpteen comics. You know, on the girls' side, you had Ginty, Mandy, Bunty, Judy, Debbie, Nikki.
I'm seeing a pattern.
Jackie.
Jackie was a magazine that had some comics in it, so it was kind of in between. But yeah, exactly, and all these girls' names ending in Y, typically. And so that's what part of what originally got me into comics. Also, I lived abroad, and we had access to Marvel comics at that point as well. So it was kind of a mixture of my comics reading as a child, and I never stopped. And that's partly because I moved on to the sort of Marvel comics when you had your Mighty World of Marvel, again, a kind of a newsstand comic that you know, your newsagents could keep for you. And then I discovered a comic shop in Manchester, and it was, you know, I saw it kind of as Mum and Dad were driving past somewhere, and I saw this sort of sign that said comics. I was like, stop the car! Stop the car, I want to get out. I'll be back in a few minutes. And I kind of went off and, you know, traced through kind of this mental kind of sniffing where I was going, and got to the comic shop in, it wasn't really a proper comic shop, it was like a swap place. And I was like, okay, I found it, it actually exists, I didn't imagine it, you know, I did manage to, I can come back here. Okay, so I went back to the car, and then I went, and then from then on I could buy my own comics, you know, sort of independently. And like you said, you could sort of find perhaps quite a run of comics at the time, in which a lot of people perhaps don't realise now that at the time the newsagent comics that you got that were Marvel or DC comics, you couldn't guarantee that you'd get the next issue, and not in order, you know, so very different from nowadays. And here was this place that had loads of back issues, and so you could fill in those gaps. One of the things that you had to be able to do as a comics reader in the UK at that time was to be able to exactly do that, filling in the gaps of stories yourself. And I've got this issue, and then I've got one about 5 issues later. Can I kind of figure out what happened in between, or kind of I can see that some things changed, and here's this new character, you know. So yeah, you had to actually do quite a lot of story writing yourself in some ways. And then I went to university, and I started a comics society at university, and that turned into the Caption Comics Convention in Oxford, which was focused as being a small press and independent comics convention, as it is right now. And that was partly because we'd gone to GlasCAC and UCAC, so we'd gone to those big comics conventions that existed at the time, very mainstream. There was a very sort of big divide between the creators and the fans, and the creators were able to go off into a little room or a sort of green room area and be not very visible to the fans, and very understandably in the sense of often these are people who are very sought after and perhaps pestered and so forth, but it did mean that there was a big divide, and what we wanted to do in Caption was to not have that divide.
And when you were forming Caption, and indeed when you were hanging out with the other members of the Comics Club at the university, how were you getting in touch with other small press creators outside of Oxford?
Well, we weren't really at that point. Well, no, I tell a lie. We were, but in London, because there was some people who did APAs, which were amateur press associations, where what you would do is you'd have a group of people who decided to collaborate on perhaps a 4-weekly basis to send a comic or a zine in to a central location, and that central mailer would collate it all and send it out again by post, so obviously quite slow. And that was a fandom for discussing comics and for producing comics. And some people in that were people who were comics professionals or comics semi-professionals. And then there would be a get-together, perhaps in London, perhaps once a year. Yeah.
And I suppose you guys, because you both have an interest in mainstream comics and small press, have found the convention experience a place where you have creators of both kinds, mingling. And maybe the aim of Caption in a way has expanded into other conventions over the years.
Yes, I mean, sorry, I'll pass it back to you guys. But I mean, at the time that I started talking of, there was only one main convention and a spin-off in Glasgow, and very little chance for people to get together. Obviously, no internet. It was by by writing individual letters or by this sort of exchange of zines. And so the chance of actually meeting other people outside of your geographical area was quite small.
This is our first time, isn't it, Caption? I speak for everyone, I say we've had a wonderful time, because it isn't like any other Comic Con.
I wasn't fishing, but...
No. Yeah, usually if you're at a Comic Con you get tackled to the ground by stormtroopers and all that sort of thing. Yeah, it's really intimate, and it's about comics as well, which is a rare treat at Comic Cons these days, which is strange. So maybe we should take this moment to thank Alex and Alan, everyone, for organising it. Let's give them a clap. Again, I've embarrassed you. Continue.
Well, and thanks to previous Caption members for creating this. So, but yeah, I mean, because it does seem that as Jenny was saying, that at previous conventions, and indeed I suppose still at some of the conventions where you have stormtroopers and cosplayers and B-list actors selling their signatures for £15 a pop, there still is a bit of a divide between the fans and the creators, and maybe there needs to be more events where that's kind of broken down.
Absolutely. So we were at the International Comics Expo the other week, and that was another one like this. It was comics focused,
wasn't it?
Everyone's approachable and stuff. Back when I was just a fan rather than a creator, I'd go to those and pay £20 to meet a celebrity, and you'd get an autograph, and they'd turn their back on you and stuff. But
well, it's not set up for interaction, is it? I mean,
absolutely.
To be fair, the people who are there have been paid to be there. Perhaps not very much if they also need to sell the autographs or whatever. And it's not set up for that interaction, and I think you actually need to design that in, kind of at the beginning, because otherwise you're not going to get that. Like having a bar area, which is not only open to all, but the expectation is that people can mingle there, but also the expectation that people aren't going to be hassled, because there's no point in having some very big name person there if everyone's going to mob at them. So there's got to be understanding kind of all round, I think.
I mean, certainly the little venues do work. I remember the sort of the Bix back at the Custard Factory, which is I suppose a similar kind of setup, a lot of little indie shops, bars, restaurants, sort of places to chill out, where you are going to bump into creators that maybe you've grown up with, or you are going to bump into the new creators as well. And I think a good comic convention like Caption does does create a platform. And I think that's where, the bigger conventions like MCM do actually create a platform. I think from the people I've spoken to there, people like Neil Gibson from T Publishing, he will actually say, well, these people, it's for their first experience. It could be picking up their comic, taking it away, and they're not necessarily comic fans, even though the thing's called a Comic Con. I think for me personally, what I found is that it's the independent comics in Britain particularly where it's more exciting. I'm finding for the first time in over 30 years, I'm moving away from superheroes. I'm actually beginning to question what drug I'm putting in my body, because am I collecting Superman just because I've always liked Superman? I mean, the DC Superman at the moment ain't my Superman. He's not the one. Anyone who wears a flat cap backwards is not my Superman. But what I am getting enamoured and excited by people like Reese, by some of the people in this room, and of course with a young daughter at the age of 10 now who's also voraciously getting into reading. It's bringing a new generation in as well, and I think that's what good independent comics can do. It gives a voice. It moves away from the the capes and cows sort of mindset and model, and very different art styles as well that move away again from maybe a certain corporate style that people have to or don't have to follow.
But again, I mean, it's not all bad in the superheroes realm, obviously. I mean, look at Ms. Marvel, for instance. The latest, the new publication. What's her name? Kamala. I've got no surname now. Khan. That's right, of course. But anyway, yeah. I mean, she's a great character. I think it's laid out and drawn in a very, all ages acceptable way. Kind of open, not acceptable. A way that brings people in is what I mean. Certainly, my kid who's 5, she can read that, not all by herself. And it might be the odd bit where it's like, it's got maybe that bit I won't explain quite yet. But generally speaking, it's a great comic. So there's always stuff in every genre, isn't there?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, a lot of the bigger conventions these days do sort of sell tables to small press creators, and that's actually how they make some of their income, even if it isn't necessarily beneficial to the small press creators. But in terms of you guys coming across small press publishing, where have been the venues that you found kind of interesting and exciting titles you wouldn't have known about otherwise?
Not sure, really. Ali, you're more. I've only done 2 conventions selling comics. The rest of it's been store signings.
What about buying comics?
Probably quite a few more. I guess it depends on the attitude of the person you're buying it from as well, because sometimes someone could be there and they haven't sold something before and then they're miserable, and then as a result of that they're kind of unapproachable. So I guess it's about the attitude of the person selling it, and you got to kind of find that happy medium between someone not engaging you trying to sell it on someone being too pushy. But that's my view anyway as a consumer.
But you found a lot of success with the magazine. I mean, your magazine was meant to be quarterly. You've already got the second issue out. And I mean, obviously following you on Facebook and Twitter, I've seen that success escalate just over a couple of months. I mean, is that from ICE? Is that from getting out and about yourself? Is that putting the word out? I mean, what's your model for the success behind the magazine?
I think it's just all the amazing talent involved. So in the room, George over there, he's an incredible writer. Yeah, and obviously yourself, and we had Al Davison contribute some pages from his muscle memory and stuff. It's just about doing the best thing we could possibly do. Obviously it started off as just a few friends wanting to get together and do like a Dodge and Logic style thing, and it quickly escalated, and it's not quarterly anymore, it's called magazine rather than quarterly. And we've launched a YouTube channel, so we've got the Indie Project TV running side by side, and we're currently doing something with a production company as well. It's all a bit hush-hush at the moment, but we should be able to talk about that in about a week or so.
But that does seem to be something that is changing the model, that you have to engage with social media, that previously, I mean, small press creators could only rely on things like Caption, or if their local comic shop had some kind of bulletin board where you could put up adverts and things. Because I remember talking to, who's the guy who does did a really loud kind of music comic that was big in the Lakes, and he does, his most recent thing is called Beast Machine, Owen something.
Johnson.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, he, I spoke to him at the Lakes a couple of years ago, and he was saying because he found a comic shop in, you know, a relatively big town from where he was living in the middle of nowhere. It was a place where you could build a community because you knew that other comic creators would go there. And so if you put up a notice saying, I'm looking for people to work with, you know, before there was the support network of social media, that's how these things sort of started.
Yeah.
I think it's constantly evolving and changing. Even when I started out, I said I'm not going to have a business plan. If someone wants to comment, they can get it or not. But that quickly becomes a business plan itself. And then if you're trying to do your own thing, it doesn't stay your own thing for long. So every couple of months you have to change it. And it's got to the point now where I'll go to the town centre, I'm doing like a signing in with leaflets and just hand them out, trying to get this audience that wouldn't normally be an audience that I could reach. If that makes sense.
So what sort of social media have you feel that you've had to engage with in order to build your audience?
Well, luckily at the moment there's like a big comics community in like Facebook groups and stuff. So it's great to talk to them because they really support indie creators as well as the mainstream. It's kind of like a mutual love. There's quite a lot of, like you were saying, there's a lot of anger and hatred and stuff. None of that's really there most of the time.
There's a lot of passion within the small press and large press, and like I said, when you get creators, whether they're professional or not, and I certainly noticed this at ICE, both this year and last year, that passion just exudes from everyone. It's almost as if, for want of a better phrase, everyone's on a level playing field. I know Nostalgia and Comics in Birmingham, they welcomed me with open arms when I first moved here. And I've been quite loyal to ever since, and what they do once a month, first Wednesday of every month, if anyone's ever in Birmingham on the first Wednesday of every month, they'll actually go to the local pub, the Victoria, sit down, and you can have people like Mark Farmer turning up, Hunt Emerson turning up, John McCree turning up, and you know, and you're just sitting there having a job. I didn't even know what Mark Farmer looked like until I'd been talking to him for 2 hours. So that's Mark Farmer, really? But you know, these are very ordinary, sort of accessible people, and you know, they do say never meet your heroes, but I've yet to meet a hero of mine. That I've never been happy to meet, because they are very sort of down to earth. These are people who, I suppose, outside of the comic world, aren't known. They can live on your street or my street, and no one would probably know what they're doing, or they wouldn't understand what they were doing anyway. And so I think there's a certain modesty, no matter how big a person gets. And certainly that's what I've experienced the most, this sharing of ideas, this sort of, whether it's sharing of social network. I mean, you put yours up on Issue, which is a wonderful free publishing, which does give you this feeling of turning the page. It's not as interactive as Electric Comics or other things that I've seen, but certainly that's a great starting point, and building up an audience. And something like Issue, or even having your own blog, you're in control of it. You're able to see where the hits come from, who's reading you, what spikes, what doesn't spike. And I think that, you know, you've got your own focus group in there, really.
Yeah. But on your own blog, I mean, you've got to still focus on what moves you, haven't you? I mean, I think there's obviously a danger of going, oh well, that was successful, I'll do more of that. Well, that's good if that's the direction that you want to go in. But you know, you can get a bit too tied into that, I'm sure. But that's no different to any other kind of publishing, I'm sure. So.
Well, I mean, in terms of your engagement with social media, you're involved with the Bring Back Misty project on Facebook?
Yeah, but that's just a Facebook group that I'm on. I don't think we're doing anything particularly active. I have got a blog that's about a comic of the same era. That's about Ginty comic, and that's really a fairly small project in terms of who's involved in it. That's me and a friend of mine in New Zealand, and it turns out if anyone ever wants to start a blog with somebody else, then get somebody who's living in the other side of the world from you, because you wake up in the morning and they've written stuff, which was really, really good. So and you know, obviously she's a good writer and she's into the same sort of things and everything. But the focus on that is really to kind of build up some reference material, because with these weekly comics, you know, they were only in the 70s and 80s, so not long ago in the grand scheme of things, but people's memories are going. You know, there's a lot of the creators who worked on them who are dead, or who, you know, are very old now, or, you know, not able to be found and to be contacted. And it wasn't an era of fandom, and it still is something, not in the same way as it is now, and it still is something that isn't very focused on by fans, girls' comics, of those times. And so there's very little information, especially about who wrote the comics. And there's some fantastic stuff in them, really, really weird and kind of off-the-wall stuff that you wouldn't expect to see. You know, like there's one about, this is one of my favourite ones to mention, about a school with a very odd policy, which is that the headmistress, Purity Goodfellow, has built like a Grecian temple in her school, and she has found a mystic drug in India which turns school children perfect, and it turns them into very well-behaved young ladies, and for some reason there only seem to be girls in this school and indeed this entire village, and they all dress in white. And they suddenly start doing cordon bleu cookery and making ball gowns for their mothers, for their mamas and papas, I should say. And of course it all goes horribly wrong, and the headmistress tries to sacrifice the main protagonist down a fiery pit, but luckily she fights back, and the headmistress ends up falling down the pit. So that's all right then. But it's basically Stepford School Children done for school children, for school girls, in 1979, and it's very subversive because it's saying perfection is not actually all it's cracked up to be. What society expects you to do is not all that's cracked up to be. Your parents are not on your side. Your parents are happy to have this mad woman drug you. This is in the story.
And that's what we can all learn from comics.
That's what I learned from them.
But it's funny, I mean, it's kind of what I was getting at, that, you know, whether it's social media or places like Caption, there are now these increasing opportunities for creators, fans of comics, people from different generations, people who know different generations of comics, in order to interact and share their experience with each other. I mean, I put you in touch the other day with Hannah Eaton, who did a great graphic novel called Naming Monsters, and she's doing a bit of research on Misty, and she's now realising that perhaps a lot of her own work is based on very distant memories she had as a child from reading those comics and had half forgotten them.
Yes.
But you know, having these communities means that you can bring this information back.
It's the bits that haven't been lost already, absolutely, yes. Yeah.
I mean, is there anything that you guys have kind of come across when you've become further involved with comics communities that's taught you more about the subject and formed kind of new links and new associations?
Yeah, I'm constantly learning new things every day. I've learned so much from all the talks from you guys, and you know, Al's workshops and stuff. I've learned so much just in those few hours. And yeah, that's what it's about, is constantly learning and adapting. You know, recently I've had a few bad incidents that we've spoken about, and yeah, you constantly learning to improve yourself, protect yourself, and be the best you can be. So if you look at my first comic that I did 10 months ago, and then just like flick through each time. Have you read most of mine? You see the artwork improve tenfold every time, and while it's still not at a professional standard, I'd like to think that maybe, you know, 5 years down the line, I'm going to be producing some high quality stuff. No, it's not high quality now. Please still buy it, but
But you have to keep going, yeah.
Well, it's that passion. I mean, you know, coming back from a day at work and then thinking, right, I've got 2 or 3 hours writing to do. It's not a chore. It's an enjoyment, and it's something that, you know, keeps me alive. It's something, as I say, switches me off for any problems that may have happened everyone's got problems at work. It refocuses, and I think certainly from what I've seen of people like Reese, and certainly from Jenny as well, it is this passion, it's this desire. I mean, the old adage is you've got to spend money to make money. I don't think you do. I think you've got to give your time up. You've got to be enthusiastic, and hopefully that, you know, that passion shows certainly on the faces of the people I've met in the 2 years I've been writing for Bleeding Cool. That's certainly something I take away. People giving up their time. You know, I was at a Ladies Do Comic event. I know they're speaking later on today. The other Thursday, and this is people giving up their time, but this is people sharing, as we are doing today, sharing that passion for the small press, for big press, for what got them into comics, what got them into writing in the first place. I think everyone who's producing either writing or drawing, we're all frustrated writers, artists. You know, we all want to write for the big two, I'm sure. But, you know,
the Beano and the Dandy.
The Beano and the Dandy, of course. And Nutty, I remember Nutty, that's when Banana Man first started. Yeah, but there just seems to be something at the moment in the air. I don't know whether it's because of the new interest in comics in general, the fact that there are more women, if the research is to be believed, that read comics now than men, in between all the women who are playing games as well. I mean, there seems to be a shift in change. It's no longer, when I was doing an MA looking at women in comics, it's no longer women just picking up Sandman. There's so much out there for them. And whether they're going in because of their fathers dragging them to comic conventions, whether it's going in because they've got a passion. There's so many different ways into comics now. And social network, IT, digital platforms do give people that much more opportunity, I think, getting something out there into the public sphere.
Yeah.
Cool. Does anyone in the audience have anything they'd like to ask any of our guests and creators, or just topics that you'd like to discuss regarding small press and self-publishing?
I do. How did you first start writing about small press comics or Bleeding Cool?
Bleeding Cool just put up something asking for regional writers, and it's something I'd played about with when it was Comics International at my days at university. And it's just something, well, back in my 20s, I had other things to do to write. And I think, because I have always been a frustrated writer, when I first left university, I didn't want to be a teacher. But teaching PGC was the only thing that was going to give me a grant. So I did teaching because I wanted to spend another year at Leeds University, simple as that. You fall into these things, you get certain sort of commitments like being head of department and everything that comes with that. And it was then thinking I haven't got time to do this writing malarkey, and I think something just twigged with Bleeding Cool. And I think the great thing with Bleeding Cool and Hannah and Rich behind it is they give me carte blanche. Whatever I want to write about, I can write about. So it started off writing about comic conventions, but then meeting people like you, meeting so many different indie people that I wanted to sort of do something. So now it's gone on to a monthly column, Max Books, where I do promote and sort of review or preview comics, and that seems to be getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's time, and what I'd love to say is at this point in time I could make writing for Bleeding Cool a full-time job, but like many contributors, it doesn't pay, but I don't mind that. It builds up my experience, and like you say, the more you write, the better you get. I think I'm aware of my own limitations as an English teacher, but I want to get that better. People like Paul Birch, who was here yesterday, and Steve Tanner, talking to them, saying, well, how could I get into writing comics? You've got this sort of anthology thing. I think, again, that's the great thing about the British tradition of anthologies. And listening to Ian Edgington yesterday and Leah saying, well, they're quite open for suggestions at 2000 AD, whereas sort of going back to ICE and listening to a couple of American editors, it's not as easy to crack. I can understand why. But you've got something like 2000 AD here, you've got the opportunity like Issue, you've got people who you can plug into who are willing to, and you've got things like Kickstarter, Indiegogo and these sort of platforms. And and again it comes back to this huge explosion of social network. I'm surprised some of the people who retweet me. 2 or 3 days later, I still don't really know how Twitter works. But it certainly seems to be, if you've got a positive attitude, then people are willing to listen to you. And I think, for me, my biggest break really was being able to talk to Mike Martz about Aftershock, knowing that he didn't really get on well with Bleeding Cool. But I think if you're positive about something you love about, and everyone in this room is, that's almost your calling card. It's that passion, it's that enthusiasm, it's that energy, and that adrenaline rush that I still get. I still, every time I go to the comic shop, have that adrenaline rush like I was a 5-year-old, 10-year-old kid again.
But I mean, you were talking about publishing opportunities. In terms of the British scene, you mentioned 2000 AD, but for a while that was the only venue in Britain, and maybe the odd graphic novel from Jonathan Cape, usually, by Brian Talbot and no one else. But now, as well as Cape's larger range, there's Myriad, there's Self-Made Hero, there's various kind of collectives for different platforms. I mean, Jenny, you've probably witnessed this as much as anyone else. The kind of different venues that you can get work as a British creator, with it no longer being a place where, I make my mark in 2000 AD and then I send my portfolio to America, is no longer the only model.
Absolutely. I mean, it's changed. I've never been a professional comics person. I've never been a player in that market, but just from the sidelines seeing what's changed. Obviously, webcomics helped give a model for people to be able to publish their own material in a way that was easier to distribute and to have your work seen by other people. And you know, in the early years of 2000, 2001, 2002, you know, that started happening, and you could see that was making a difference. People could do colour work instead of being restricted to black and white, because that was cheaper for photocopying or for cheap printing. And yeah, not a problem to distribute it. And I think really you could sort of see that being the start of an uptick. I mean, like Myriad, for instance, I guess that's a sign of a sort of a maturity of the people who've been involved in comics for a long time. So Corinne Perlman has been involved in comics since, I think, at least the 70s. And now she's in that position where she's, you know, she's actually running that press and doing a range of publishing graphic novels, but also prose books. And because she's had that contact all the way through, she's keeping both strands of it fused, which I think is great. So I think it's part of the general acceptance within our culture that's happened over the past sort of 15, 20 years. Technological changes, obviously, social media. It's great because, yeah, exactly. As a reader, there's huge amounts to read. As a creator, there's a lot of ways to get your work seen by people. And if you want to do something without necessarily, you know, worrying about making it a professional deal, there's lots of ways to do that too. Blogging being one element.
You know, and I'm not going to say this is a particularly British thing, but we're in Britain, so I am. But it also seems that certain British publishers are now trying to go out their way to change the format of comics, if at all possible, in order to suggest to people you don't have to look at other comics in order to know how to make comics. I mean, Leah was talking in the previous panel about how you can use the Electric Comics interface to do anything, as long as it still eventually has some kind of connotation to words and pictures. But beyond that, you know, you can move in and out of different panel constructions and pages. And someone like Corinne, working with Myriad Editions, they seem to go out their way to commission graphic novels that actually really push the format. Things like, for example, Gareth Brooks' The Black Project, which is a mixture of kind of old-fashioned printing techniques, sewing, collage, you know, that people may not even necessarily think that's how you can make comics.
Because evolution would be the word. Obviously, we can't keep doing the comics that were coming out in the 60s because they already exist. So I need to get with the times, man. And yeah, just keep doing unique content. We can't just stagnate. It's like the same for me as a writer, and I assume the same for all of us. You know, if the next thing I do isn't better than the last thing I do, I'm either the same or I'm getting worse. I don't want either of those things. We'll see what happens.
On an individual basis, you've got to keep on doing, you know, developing and changing, sure. But as a, you know, as a culture in terms of what reading is out there, I mean, obviously, here I am on my blog, I'm looking at stuff that's, you know, that's 30 or 40 years old. There's lots of good stuff in those comics from relatively a long time ago, stuff that you don't even see nowadays necessarily. So, you know, we mustn't ignore the past either. You know, you can react to it, you can develop your own work, absolutely. But there's a lot of stuff, you know, again, you know, going further back, the 40s, 50s and 60s Superman or the daft Lois Lane comics, you know, absolutely fantastic stuff. In their own right, you've got to value those as well.
Oh, absolutely. They're still completely relevant. What my point I was trying to make was we don't have to do it exactly the same again.
No.
That was my point.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, or kind of what I was getting at was that there are comics outside of Jack Kirby, which not a lot of people seem to realise. And when you look at the, you know, kind of self-reflexivity of a lot of comics, they only look at a very narrow range of examples of the medium without actually thinking there were also girls comics in the 1970s, there were also romance comics in the 1950s, there were also Italian fumetti, you know, Japanese manga, you know, and so on.
And it's funny the things that people don't even think of as comics. A lot of people, you know, parents in bookshops, they don't think that Tintin counts as a comic or Asterix counts as a comic, which clearly they are, but they've been shelved in people's minds separately. People don't think Fungus the Bogeyman is a comic. It's clearly a comic. People don't think of it in those same terms.
How about you, Ollie? Did you find any on the spinner racks as any obscure titles, or
Not ever. It was always DC Marvel. I never bought Marvel when I was a kid. What got me into Marvel was the John Byrne issue of Fantastic Four, where he's basically chasing Doc Octopus around the city because his wife's about to have a miscarriage, and Doc Octopus is the only guy, because of his doctor's background, who can help him out. And it really resonated with me. Again, it was from reading the Mighty World of Marvel and the Captain Britain stuff in there, and reading about Spider-Man's new comic, new black costume. So again, my gateway drug to the American Marvel stuff was through the British reprints. I mean, I'm glad to say that even today, the kids in my school will pick up comics before they'll pick up a digital platform to read a comic on. And I think there's a whole generation of people my age and a bit younger who've now grown up to be teachers, to be librarians. You know, a sad thing is, as libraries are discovering comics more, they're being shut down one after another. We're very lucky in our school. We follow the Excelsior Awards, which is run through schools. It's by school kids. It's similar to the Carnegie Awards, which is a book award. And it encouraged kids. Miss Marvel was shortlisted for that one, and in a school where 100% of my kids are Muslim, I actually stood there and did an assembly on Miss Marvel, knowing that in 6 months' time we're going to get a comic. Still one of the most popular graphic novels that are taken out of the library. We had to get 2 in. So I'm glad to say that, you know, traditional comics aren't dead. I'm glad to say that if a good library and a good bookshop will put them front and centre, and they will mix up Asterix with Fungus the Bogeyman with the best stories of the Justice League of America. You know, we use illustrated graphic novels of Shakespeare for the less able kids, and for us, they're able to access more. I mean, again, going back to the Yellow Kid in the 1800s, you know, a great thing, it tackles the immigration literacy problem in the same way as comics can still do that today for a new set of immigration, whether the Labour Tory parties want them in or not. I mean, it's still one of the first inroads, I think, for people learning as a family, for people getting into comics and discovering the old greats as well as the modern greats.
Yeah, I'm half Brazilian, and I learned Portuguese through reading comics. Reading Donald Duck, reading, you know, we lived in Brazil at the time, so obviously I was in the right medium for it, right location for it. But yeah, I mean, that's how I learned comics. So I learned Portuguese and comics.
Wow.
Sorry.
Although obviously your Portuguese was based to around duck-based aphorisms.
I tell you what though, there are various Uncle Scrooge and Donald Duck characters that I only really know the Portuguese name of. The witch character, she's Maga Patológica, only she's called Magica Dispel, I think. And
sounds much better in Portuguese.
yeah, Maga Patológica is great. But yeah, so you know, there's still characters that I think of in those terms, absolutely. But yeah, it works. It works.
It does, yeah.
Cool. Well, I think maybe so everyone actually has a chance to buy a coffee before the next panel in 20 minutes' time. I might wrap this up. Having spent the last hour in this nice cosy room, we're going to have to move to a big refrigerated cavern it seemed like a good idea at the time, to hear Paul Rainey talk about There's No Time Like the Present. But in the meantime, thank you very much, Ollie, Reese and Jenny.